You cling to the mask, and you have a choice. You can wear that mask to your grave, or you can at some point take it off and take the huge risk of being truly loved or truly hated for who you actually are.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. I am so excited to talk to you about fear, imposter syndrome, and so much else.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. We'll have fun.
You've said in the past that our brains have been built to keep us alive, to help us survive. But at the same time, our brains don't allow us to actually live. I think that is so powerful, and what a biological irony. And your work helps people master their brain and their mind so they can make the brain work for them rather than against them. And I want to go into the science behind this first, the anatomy of the brain. And, a lot of people know that the amygdala is responsible for signaling threats and danger. It's really the primitive, reactive, instinctual part of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that tells us whether those signals are justified. Can you go a little bit into the science behind this great biological irony?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, you said it perfectly. Our brains just aren't built for the world in which we live, right? They're built for ancestral times. And the reason for that is, while technology and populations and all this incredible medical technology has evolved really quickly, biology operates on a different time frame. So we've got Stone Age brains essentially living in a modern world. And so they're really mismatched. The Stone Age brain is a little overactive about, we have to stay alive. There's snakes everywhere. There's danger. Because we did live in a sparse, scary environment back in the day. Now, today, it's, we're very, very lucky, most of us, in this fairly abundant environment that we live in. And I'm speaking from a position of extreme privilege here, but nevertheless, across populations, we've had this extreme shift in our ability to basically just stay alive. But our brains aren't built for that, right? Our brains are just saying, oh my gosh, there's danger everywhere. We have to stay on the lookout. And so we're constantly in this state of stress, of feeling like it's a life and death situation, which basically doesn't breed happiness. Our brains aren't built to be happy. They're built to stay alive and reproduce. But that's a separate talk. So we really have to sort of work with our brains, work with our biology, if we want to be productive and happy and healthy in the modern environment in which we live.
Yes. And in one of your TED Talks, you also talked about how the evolutionary biology factor also has a lot to do with our sweet tooth, for example, or with our ability to feel uncomfortable in situations where we're not familiar with diversity, for example. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Stone Age brain. To the Stone Age brain, you can't get enough fats and sugars to survive, because there's a cold, harsh winter coming, and we've got to layer it down so that we can make it through. Or, today we can just go and turn up our thermostat, right? Our brain doesn't know that. And so our brains actually crave things that kill us. Like, we die 100, like the biggest thing that we die from is heart disease. And yet burgers and French fries look delicious to us, and ice cream is my favorite. But those fats and sugars, our brain is still triggered by, because our brain is literally craving things that kill us today. So there's a mismatch there. The same way, diversity initiatives continue to fail for any number of reasons. But one of the reasons I think we haven't considered closely enough is that, to our brains, anybody who looks different, acts different, operates under a different set of rules and regulations, well, ancestrally, they're not coming over to borrow a cup of sugar, right? We lived among people that looked like us, acted like us, operated under the same rules and regulations. And so anybody that looks different, well, they're a real threat, right? They're going to kill us all and steal all of our resources. And No, they're not. This is the modern world, but our brain hasn't caught up to that. So to this day, we will still have stress responses, independent of how conscious. I'm not saying your listeners or you or me are biased, bad humans. Has nothing to do with that. Has everything to do with the fact that our brain and our biology is trying to keep us alive. So to this day, each and every one of us is going to have a stress response when we see a stranger who doesn't look like us. And when that stress response occurs, the first thing that stress does, the first thing that cortisol does, is it shuts down the thinking portion of your brain, this frontal lobe, as you talked about, right? The gift of human evolution, where we think and we're conscious and cognitive from, goes away, because our brain is built to keep us alive. So we react from this, reactionary, fear-based response of saying, oh, dangerous, scary, disease-ridden, which again, in the modern environment, really unhelpful response.
And this is so powerful, because at the end of the day, if we can override that, right, we can thrive. And I love your motto of live more, fear less.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful, this idea of living more. To me, it's really freedom. It's the ability to be free to live authentically you in this world. And fear, and I think I wrote you an email about this, to me, it is the key word of humanity, right? A 19th century Indian monk, Swami Vivekananda, he once said, the whole secret to existence is to have no fear. And we misconstrue that word fear. We think of it maybe as fear of an earthquake or fear of some physical threat. But, and also obviously a lot of us fear COVID, for example, but let's talk about fear in the way we're talking about it here. Fear of being judged by someone as foolish, being fearful of being looked at as incompetent, being fearful of being rejected by someone, a colleague, or someone in your family, fear of being isolated. There are countless numbers of fears that go on in our head. And it's those fears that hold us back from living. It's such a powerful concept. And it doesn't matter who you are. You could be Winston Churchill, you could be Arnold Schwarzenegger, you could be a Navy SEAL. Everyone has fears. Every human has fears. And the end game here, the goal, is to minimize those fears as much as possible so we can live free or live more, as you suggested. Can you talk more about fear and the science, of these kinds of fears?
Oh man, I would love to. Absolutely. So a couple points of clarity. You mentioned my little motto, which is live more, fear less. And I think you nailed it on the head when you said, not free of fear. We don't have to be free of fear. I don't think anybody is ever free of fear, but fear less being in parentheses. Consciously sorting our fears to say, oh, that's an actual hungry tiger that's charging me. I should be afraid of that, right? Versus, oh, I have the potential of failing or looking bad or being foolish or having people laugh at me. That's a really big fear to our brain, and it treats it the same as if it's a charging tiger. And it's not. To our Stone Age brain, it is, because to our Stone Age brain, you get kicked out of the tribe, you die. There's no coming back from that. And so our brain is really sensitive to especially social isolation or social being kicked out of a tribe, right? And so one of the strategies that I've talked a lot about is called stress inoculation, where you actually seek forms of safe discomfort, right? Ask for 20% off the next time you go to Starbucks. See what happens, right? It's going to cause a stress response. When you lean into your barista, your heart is going to start pounding out of your chest. Your mouth is going to dry up. You might start sweating. You're having a full-on stress response. For what? For asking for a discount? Because you might get responded no. And the no is this huge thing to your brain, like, we're going to get kicked out of the tribe. No, you're fine. You pay your $10.99 or whatever you pay for your coffee and you walk out the door. Now you're starting to train your brain to say, every time I have a stress response, it doesn't mean I'm going to die. Interesting, I can choose now. So the more we actively seek these safe forms of discomfort, the more when discomfort finds us and we're not actively seeking it, we can say, I know what this is. I've layered down that information in my brain. I know what this is. And in fact, it's not a tiger. This isn't a life and death situation. I can slow down my stress response. I can come back into my conscious mind and make a different decision. The difficulty in all of this, right, is that our brain treats social rejection and a broken arm the same way. That pain is the same response. So you could do this, it's kind of an evil experiment to do, but I guess you could put somebody in an MRI and break their arm, and you'd see this portion of their brain light up. And if you did the exact same thing, but instead of breaking their arm, you rejected them, somebody that they loved rejected them, you'd see the exact same center of the brain light up. So what do we do with broken bones? Well, we splint them, we restrict their movement, we encase them, and we do the exact same thing with our social rejection. We say, I never want to experience that again. How can I bind that up? How can I just put that away and tuck it away and put it behind a wall so I never have to experience that again? And what that leads to is people-pleasing behaviors. It's, well, I'll do this so I never have to feel that. And if I just bend myself this way and contort, and then I'll fit in, and then they won't know and I won't get rejected. Well, long-term, that is really detrimental to yourself. And so we end up in these behavioral patterns where our brain says, no, this is the safe thing to do. When in reality, it's the exact opposite. We're really not creating safety for ourselves by becoming something that we're not.
Yeah. And while you're talking, I think a lot about ego. Ego is driven a lot by fear, right? And fear lives in this primal, instinctual, reactive part of our brain, the amygdala. So its home is there, and ego is not somebody having inflated ideas about themselves. Not just that, it's somebody sitting on our shoulder, tapping us and saying, criticizing us, judging us, telling us we're bad, and at the same time that they're telling us we're good. So in my view here, ego is such a big part of what you're talking about too, because it's us observing our thoughts, right? It's us observing our emotions, us observing our reactions. How do you think about ego involved in these great examples that you've given?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that, right? One of my favorite sayings, and I wish I could remember that attribution, but it's don't believe everything you think.
Yeah.
When you catch yourself thinking, and we all have these automatic negative thoughts, these ants, right? The acronym ants. Oh, you're a terrible human being. You're a failure. You're not worthy. Whew. That's a painful space, and that's what kept you alive. Again, not going to make you happy, not going to help you live fully in the modern environment, but that is your ego saying you have to become something, you have to build something, you have to show up, you have to show off, you have to be this thing, rather than saying, what if I didn't have to prove myself? To whom am I supposed to prove myself? To a teacher, parent, child, offspring, spouse? Like, when we stop and we question that. So for me, the big way to get around those internal saboteurs, those ego-driven, ideologies is to say, how can I be curious here? Because within curiosity, you can't have fear. If you can be curious in the moment, if you can ask yourself a question, right, the fear starts to dissipate. So I want to challenge everybody, when you hear that voice, say, well, what if that wasn't the case? Or for whom am I trying to prove myself? Start asking questions of yourself, and I think it'll drive out a lot of that fear. But yeah, to your point, spot on. That ego is, it's a nasty driver.
Yeah, and thinking about how to overcome fear, and you've given a couple of these great examples. We talked about really observing your thoughts, knowing that you are not your mind, right? You are not your thoughts, and practicing being in these uncomfortable situations, being able to feel yourself in these uncomfortable situations. Often I think about kind of extracting you from your life. So being able to say, this is not about me, I am not all that, right? What I'm doing today is not about me. That in a way also helps overcome fear. What other tactics, suggestions, tips, tools do you give people to, and it's such a big topic, but how can people start small to overcome this instinctual reactive nature that we can't get rid of?
Yeah, well, I love where you went. I mean, honestly, the big ideal, right, is recognizing we are connected. Everybody's connected. Everything is connected. This is not about me or what I achieve or what I do in my life, and that takes a lot of weight off that ego-driven fear-based reactions. I think where people might want to start, and this is advice that I always give, and people roll their eyes and I'm like, well, have you tried it yet? Is starting with the breath. Now, everybody says this, right? Start with the breath. But I don't think people get the science behind it enough, because the breath is truly the only thing that connects our subconscious and conscious minds, right? You can't control your heart rate. You can't control the amount of hormones that are being released in your body. What you can control consciously is that one slow single breath. And when you do that, what you're signaling to all of the other systems that you're not controlling consciously is, oh, we're okay. So the parasympathetic nervous system can kick in and say, let's slow this heart rate. Let's reduce that cortisol that we're pumping out. We're okay. We're safe here. But most of us go through the day breathing very shallowly, right? And that signals constant distress. So to break that cycle, one of the breathing techniques that I give is a physiological sigh. What this does, if you've ever noticed anybody sobbing, if you've ever sobbed and you do that, right, triple inhale, what your body is trying to do there is to pop out the alveoli. So these air sacs at the base of your lungs, because when we're walking through all day, breathing shallowly, we're not actually using those full force of our lungs. And so these alveoli collapse and they trap CO2 in them. When that happens, the balance of gas exchange gets all wonky in your body, and it induces more stress. So now you've created this cycle. So to get out of that, what we have to do is pop those alveoli back open. So to do that, when we inhale intentionally, slow and long through our nose to the point where we can't take any more oxygen in, we get to that point and then go, add in just a pop more oxygen. Then when we exhale, all those alveoli have opened, we're getting rid of all that CO2. So it's a really simple place to start, because what you're doing is you're getting your body back in balance so that you even have an opportunity to opt out of the stress mode that people walk around in and day out. So 2 of those breaths has been scientific, like you can look through the scientific literature. There's huge, massive differences, statistically significant differences in cortisol production, which is 2 breaths. So 2 of those is where I would start. The other thing is, start meditating. When I say meditation, people are like, I don't do it. It's woo-woo. I'm like, okay, great. Don't do it for the woo-woo. I'm a scientist. I dug into the research, right? There's tons of great research on lower anxiety, lower blood pressure, epigenetic effects, where it literally changes your DNA. So you pass these benefits on to your offspring. I mean, it is massive. You're growing brain cells in your frontal lobe from 20 minutes of meditation. So start small, right? Meditate for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 5 breaths, right? Don't say, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to meditate for 10 hours a day or 1 hour a day, or even 10 minutes, right? Start really small so that when you do it and you accomplish it, your body releases dopamine. It's like, wow, you did it. Great. And now you're starting this winner cycle where hormones are actually helping you stay consistent in that path. So yeah, start small, start with the breath. That's where I'd begin.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we all keep coming back to this idea of finding your stillness, finding your presence, and all of that comes from meditation. All roads point to the same place, right? I want to get into imposter syndrome. Now, this is also a topic that a lot of people have been kind of expanding on lately and affects so many people. 70% of the population is infected by imposter syndrome. 70%. People like Albert Einstein, people like Tom Hanks. Imposter syndrome, and I'll have you explain to the audience a little bit more about it. But the main idea here is that when we're in positions of prestige and we get into positions of great responsibility, we don't feel like we belong there. We don't feel like we've earned it or it's justified. And for women and people from underrepresented groups, it seems to be have a greater effect. Can you expand on imposter syndrome, please?
Absolutely. Although you did a great job introducing it. And I think you were reading my notes. I just wrote down quickly, like disproportionately affects underrepresented groups. Yeah. So imposter syndrome really is the feeling of I'm a fake, I'm a fraud. They're going to find out, they're going to know, eventually somebody will know that I don't belong here. And it's a feeling, as you mentioned, 70% of people identify with this. And I actually think the number's higher.
Wow.
I think in the fluctuation is huge. I mean, sometimes we measure it at 87%.
Wow.
I think it depends on how the question is asked. And a lot of people are scared to admit that, right? It's a scary place, fear-based place to say, I don't think I belong here. So it's interesting to me in a number of levels, because first of all, I suffer from imposter syndrome in a massive way, because I never feel like I know the things that I'm supposed to know at this point. We all have that first timer fear, like, shouldn't I probably should know. And every time I come into a room, I'm sitting down and I'm going, everybody else knows all the things and I'm here. What do I have to offer? It's a pretty scary place to
Absolutely.
And so it takes me still to this day time to go, it's your imposter, that's your ego talking. Let's get beyond that. What would it look like if you failed massively?
Right.
Okay. Do you die? Good, move on. But I think imposter syndrome is often pointed back to the individual and say, okay, it's your problem. You have this thing. And in reality, it's not women, it's not underrepresented minorities, it's not that issue. The issue typically is the systems that have been put in place. So when I talk about leadership, for example, people in positions of power especially have these symptoms of imposter syndrome. And I think it's because, well, how have we defined leadership? If you look at the top 10 leadership books from even the last 10 years, 91% are written by white men. So the institution has this structure. And if you don't fit those definitions, well, how can you be a leader? And so you get into those positions and you're like, wait a second, this doesn't fit. This doesn't feel right. I'm not that person. I don't even see anybody who looks like me here. How do I belong? And so often it's not the individual that's at fault or to blame, or not that we should be blaming or shaming anybody, but we take that on and we wear that as if it's I have to own this now. I'm a fake, I'm a fraud. In reality, it's no, the system hasn't changed enough to be inclusive of all of these perspectives. So if you're feeling that, take a breath and recognize, okay, I have a unique perception here. I have a new unique perspective to offer because I may not belong. And that's great.
Absolutely. 100, 200%. And, I love this touch upon the social constructs and social biases. And that's what we see. That's our perception in the world. That's there, and it's real and it's factual. And, Michelle Obama talked a lot about this in that video that I talked about. She being through so many positions of power in her life, waiting for the time that she was going to fail, as everybody, predicted or suggested, would be the case. And she never did. And on the contrary, she was in boardrooms noticing people that really shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So that's how she so wisely said that age helps you get over imposter syndrome. The more experiences, the more of a journey you take, the wiser you become to this issue. And I want to talk about women and imposter syndrome, particularly because, as you said, leadership has been branded a male's world. The leadership books, even the work that we do, the self-development, right? The self-help, self-growth. So many of those people are men in the top 20 or so. With regard to women, it seems as though we have to prove our self-worth, whereas for men, it's assumed. So keeping that in mind, what are some tools or tips, and you talked about a few, that can help us as women overcome imposter syndrome, even though, we live in a society that's really changing very slowly and it's going to take some time, right? So we need to have those tools to enable us to thrive now, not in 500 years, when hopefully, we'll sort it out.
That, but man, at the pace we're going, got to keep charging. I think there's two things that come to mind immediately to me, and neither is a silver bullet. The biggest thing that researchers have found that helps imposter syndrome is simply talking about it. It's raising your hand and saying, I have it, and looking at the woman next to you and encouraging her to speak about it. I think the more we can gather in groups and be supportive and collaborative among one another, that's going to have the biggest impact. Because when we come together and recognize, oh, I'm not alone in feeling this, it is suddenly that cap of isolation is taken off and you're going, oh, if you're feeling this, I look at you and I think you're super successful. You've got it all together. And inside, the internal story is, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud, I don't belong here. So the more we can talk about it, the more powerful it is. And the second thing I'll say is just to check your stories. What story are you telling? Stories are so powerful. They're so powerful. When we look at placebo effects, right? And you see, for example, that drugs, in order to pass into the next level of testing, pharmaceuticals, they have to reach a 90% efficacy rating, which is good. Like, you want your pharmaceuticals to work. Placebos typically come in with about 80% efficacy. So that's not a whole lot of difference between a biologically active substance and what your brain believes the biologically active substance. So I use that story to illustrate, or that data to illustrate the fact that if you're telling yourself a story, it can have massive impacts on how you actually show up. So what story are you telling, and how is that impacting and manifesting in yourself and in your relationship with others? Make sure you're telling a story that is supportive of you. Even, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but even if you don't believe it at first, seek out stories from others that can help you see it from an outsider's perspective. So I'll just keep going if you don't mind on this for a second, because I think this is really important. There's this whole, speak kindly to yourself, yes, and you do these positive manifestations, and you talk about yourself, about how I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Yeah, those affirmations are important, but if you don't believe that and you're saying, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, you're actually causing more damage. So seeking an outsider's perspective, even telling yourself, Rebecca, you're good enough, you, Rebecca, rather than I. Just that shift in voice.
Third person,
exactly. Putting it into third person gives the emotional distance that our brain registers and says, that's not you, that's somebody else telling you, which seems so silly and small, but it's a huge way to make your biology work with you rather than against you. So getting that outsider's perspective, whether that truly is somebody else who can tell you all of the things that are, you've accomplished, or yourself telling yourself that. Those are two pretty powerful ways to move yourself out of that imposter space.
I love it. And kind of catching yourself, like you said, writing, I think you also mentioned in one of your videos, writing it down, writing down the facts about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
It happens to me all the time because our brain, the monkey mind, is just going at 200,000 miles an hour. And unless we write it down and it's on paper, isn't it hard to visualize and embody, right? And another thing you brought up reminds me of this philosopher, Montaigne, a French philosopher. And he talked about how there's this idea, at that time that philosophers, kings, and ladies didn't really go to the toilet, right? And excrete like, the normal people.
Right. Right.
And he's like, this is a bunch of baloney. We're all the same. We're all humans. We do the same thing. And I think as I was reading into this, I was learning about how we oftentimes don't think that others have the same issues that we do.
Yeah.
And just because they're sitting, at the head of a boardroom table doesn't mean that they're suffering from their own setbacks, their own anxieties. Like I said earlier, it doesn't matter who you are. You can be Warren Buffett and you're still anxious, or you still have some kind of feelings that you might not be enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's rampant, and to your point, the more these people will raise their hands and have the conversation, and the more you can be authentically you. This is another piece that I think is huge. If I don't have to be anybody else, if I go to a job interview, for example, and instead of like trying to fit in, trying to fit the culture, I'm just me, 100%. I'm putting my pants on the same way everybody else is. I'm not defecating or whatever the kings and ladies and philosophers didn't do, right? I'm just me. Then I don't ever have to suffer from imposter syndrome because they want me. They hired me. I love it. Right? I'm what people want and need. And so, being your authentic self and being comfortable in that space is a huge way to help kind of calm those imposter thoughts.
And you, Rebecca, you embody that. I am so glad to have you on today because you are this woman who is brave and courageous enough to be you, to do you, to live you. And that is the message that I love to get across to people is you have one life, live it as yourself. And this is not entirely within the imposter syndrome realm, but I want to talk about just women not being able to do this sometimes, not being able to be real, the fear of being real. And again, not because of their gender, but because of societal biases and constructs. Oftentimes we think that if we show up, in our best, as attractive as we can be, we'll be looked at as possibly, weak, passive, too feminine. Right. Or if we're funny, God forbid, or silly, which we all must be. Yes. I wish for everyone is to be silly and funny and enjoy, right? The fear is that we'll be viewed as weak. Mm-hmm. Isn't it such a powerful idea, this fear of being real? And it's what you do, Rebecca, for a living, is to help people show up and be real and be free. And it's so beautiful. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. I'm truly honored by that. There's a quote that I'm going to butcher, and it's not from somebody that you might have expected, but Jim Carrey actually talks about this mask that most people cling to, right? You cling to the mask and you have a choice. You can wear that mask to your grave, or you can at some point take it off and take the huge risk of being truly loved or truly hated for who you actually are, or you're going to cling to that mask as you fall into the grave. And to me, that's the far scarier thing, is to not ever fully live, because then you're not making decisions.
Dying with the mask on.
Dying with the mask on is not a life. It's a life of fear. It's a life of allowing that amygdala, that ancient brain, to make those decisions for you, rather than saying, hey, this is who I am. I've got some sweat right now. I'm wearing my sneakers. This is who I am. And love me, hate me. All right.
Love you. Absolutely love you. Love you. Love you, Rebecca. So in the last few minutes, I want to touch on just two things. One is I noticed that you posted something about living with intention. I think this is also so incredibly powerful, and I think it connects well with the idea that a lot of self growth, self development people talk about with regards to being in the process, loving the process more than the outcome. Can you talk to this really important principle for life, living with intention?
Yeah, there's so many places to go with that. I don't know where to
Yeah,
go. I think so many of us fall into this hedonic treadmill where we're just looking to the next thing and looking to
yeah,
the next thing. And like we get there and then it's like, oh, the grass is greener here, so I'll go here. And we never end up happy or fulfilled or honoring the time that we do get. Money comes and goes, time just goes. So if we pay attention and are intentional with our time, which is truly the biggest gift we have, we can stay in the present moment more. Rather than being depressed about the past or anxious about the future, we have this incredible opportunity to build intention into our day and really live full, fulfilling lives. Um, that's a short answer
yeah,
of where we can go for miles,
yeah,
miles and
yeah.
miles. Yeah.
And well said. Time, time is it, right? And the time is now. We live now. We're not living in the future. We can't live there. The only time we're living is right now, right here with you is life. So
It's a
that's
great space to be in. Thank you
such
so
a,
much
oh,
for
it
this. This,
absolutely
this
is.
is a gift. This is true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to talk about the other gifts that you give to people, your offerings. How can people get to know you better, be a part of what you are offering? I know you had a 6-week workshop.
Yeah.
How can people get to know your work, get involved with you, and be uplifted by you?
Well, thank you so much for that opportunity. The easiest way, honestly, is just to reach out to me. Like I'm a human being. I'm accessible. You can find me. It's just Rebecca@RebeccaHeiss.com. Please, by all means, send me an email. If you're interested in learning more about fear, overcoming, navigating fear of rejection and failure and stress and anxiety and imposter syndrome and all the things that we've kind of talked through today, I'd love to talk with you further. I'd love to see if the program is right for you. We're actually building a community of professional women right now called The Leap.
I
So
saw it.
interested in,
Awesome.
yeah, we're really excited about it. So if you're interested in joining The Leap, you can check it out at wearetheleap.com for ongoing sort of personal, professional development and just a community where we can have these important conversations and learn and grow from one another. I'm a true believer that in so much as I have anything to offer, please world, take it. And I think so many people have so much to offer. So why wouldn't we come together and try and help others who've navigated those leaps successfully reach back?
For more on how to find calm and freedom in a fast-paced world, hit the subscribe button below. And please share this wisdom with someone you love.